goal-oriented. There's a purpose behind it. And I'm an Adlerian counselor, and I believe that there's a purpose behind every behavior. And so if you could figure out what that purpose is, and the goal or the value that's associated with that resistant goal, or that goal of that behavior, if you could figure that out and substitute a behavior that satisfies the need but is socially acceptable, you've just fixed it. You just fixed it. So that's my perspective. The one thing that I want to leave you with is that resistance plus resistance equals more resistance. So the old "it's my way or the highway" approach doesn't work with resistant behaviors. So if you're developing behavior plans and the behavior plan is going to be punitive in nature and going to consequence them for X, Y, and Z, you're meeting resistant behavior with more resistant behavior. And so what happens when two forces are opposed to each other and they're working against each other? It just builds up energy. Nothing gets resolved. So paradoxical approaches stem mostly from Jay Haley's work in paradoxical theory. And he believed that extreme behavior eventually comes back to the center. That as we swing out and we stretch our wings and we do all kinds of crazy stuff, and we'll swing back to the other side, and then we'll eventually come back to the middle. A good example of this is Cyndi Lauper. From the 1980s, you could see how she looked there, right? Do you guys remember her? So, yeah, girls just want to have fun. And she was out there. She was a lot more out there than Miley Cyrus was a couple of weeks ago. She was out there, but she was a great performer. When you look at her today, look how glamorous she looks. Same voice, same person, but she went from the extreme back to the center. We find as we mature and as we get older that the extreme behaviors don't really get us what we want. And so we start coming back to the mainstream, to more of a centralized perspective. And if you count on that movement, you can assist in that movement instead of forcing it. So what does it mean to go with resistance? Has anyone ever studied Aikido? Anyone? No? Normally I get one or two. Okay, so Aikido is a martial arts philosophy. I want to say philosophy because it's not necessarily a strong discipline like karate would be, but it's not based in offensive attacks. It's more about using a person's own momentum against them so that you don't get hurt. If you've ever seen those Aikido dance, well, I call them dance, but the Aikido movement classes outside, have you seen them where they're moving in these slow motion kind of things? Those are all based off of this Aikido philosophy. So picture this for a moment. Let's say you're sitting in your car at a stop sign or a stoplight and you have your foot on the brake and a car comes up behind you, let's say going 25 miles per hour, and it doesn't see you and smashes into the rear of your car. How much damage is done to the back of your car? Lots, right? Tons of damage. Your car could even be totaled. Now let's say you're at that same stoplight, but you don't have your foot on the brake. It's in neutral. Let's say you drive stick. It's in neutral. And you're just sitting there. There's nothing holding the car in that spot. Same car comes up behind you going 25 miles per hour and hits you. Is there the same amount of damage or less? Why?
There's less resistance.
Because there's less resistance, right? Your foot's not on the brake holding it there. So the car is actually able to move forward. Now, let's say that instead of stopping at the traffic light, you're actually moving forward and that same car comes behind you going 25 miles per hour and you're going slower and hits you. Is there less damage? Of course there is. Because as you move away from something, you decrease the amount of energy that is expended and the amount of damage that's done. The same is true for behavior when it's resistant behavior. Okay? So if the behavior is rooted in some form of resistance and the need for control, if you meet the need for control with, no, I'm not going to give you control, well, you're going to escalate the situation. But if you meet the need for control with giving them some level of control, then you're going with that resistance. And then you can channel it. You may need to be taking some pretty big risks at times, and they may fail. But at least they're moving in the positive direction. Because, and I say this over and over again, our ultimate goal for kids, any kids that we work with, or any kids in our own families, is for them to be able to make good decisions themselves, right? self-control. We want them to have good self-control because we won't always be in the picture. And if we make every decision for our kids, they'll never learn that skill. And if we tell them, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, when everything that's inside of them is telling them that they should, then they'll never reach that goal either. So if you set up the guidelines and go with the resistance and use their own momentum in a way that directs them in the proper channels, then you can actually go somewhere with it. Notice the kick here. Where are the man's hands? They're down by his chest, right? She's aiming for what, though? His head, right? Shouldn't his hands be up here? Why not? Thank you. When you put your hands up here to block it, you're creating resistance. Okay? So when she hits it, she's going to do damage to his arms. When she kicks it, she's going to do damage to his arms. So he dropped his hands down and stepped back. Now, if we were to advance this, let's say she was doing a running thing and she were to do that and he were to put his hands up, it'd be a lot of resistance meeting a lot of resistance, right? Because he's got his leg back like this. He's stabilizing himself. But if he moves back and she's running up and she doesn't hit her target, what's going to happen? She's going to fall forward, right? That's the whole principle of Aikido. That's what I'm talking about when dealing with resistant behaviors. You use their own resistance against them in a way that helps them move in the direction that they need to, and you minimize the damage that's done in the process. We'll talk more about it. So does this mean that you just kind of go with the flow? Well, of course not. Because kids need structure, they need to know what the expectations are, and it's important to hold kids accountable for their actions at all times. And does it mean that I give up my control entirely? No, not at all. In fact, you're more in control because you know the outcome. You're helping them to gain control. So you're giving them, letting them borrow control, and then coming back and processing it. And does it mean then teach that they can get whatever they want? No, not really. No, because some behaviors actually are worth it and some behaviors aren't. And so if you teach these kids and adults, you teach them to make good decisions, they weigh the pros and the cons about a decision before they move forward, some behaviors are actually worth it. And they may go ahead and still do it. It may be a horrible behavior, but it may still be worth it. And some aren't. So that's our goal, is to teach them self-control. Big picture. Remember the big picture. And is it just reverse psychology? No. No, it's not setting them up to say, you know, I have to tell you this, and I'm guilty of it. My youngest kid will not smile for a camera. He will if you give him the right motivation, and that right motivation is, don't you dare smile. And then he's like, big smile for the camera. That's reverse psychology. This is not reverse psychology. So the whole point, again, is to teach them to make good decisions. Great. So where do we start? Do we need a break? Okay, let's go ahead and take, what is it? A 15-minute break. And then we'll come back here and we'll be starting by 5 minutes till. Thank you.